from those encounters where we experience a reciprocal process. And so it seems obvious that if you want, if you see schools as places where we want human beings to thrive, and I don't think there are very many people who would want to argue with that it seems fundamental to look at how, humans operate and what drives them and what motivates them. And feeling that we're under a microscope, feeling scrutinized, feeling that we're not trusted is a sort of guaranteed way to create an environment where people are least likely to take risks and least likely to do what they think is right and try and second guess themselves and be more motivated to look good rather than be good. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
go on.
No, I was going to say, I've been in situations or in settings where you've got teachers who have that one observation lesson.
Yeah.
And when they're being observed, whether by the school or by Ofsted, it's that one lesson because it was identified as an outstanding lesson.
Yeah.
And that's because probably of the lack of trust and the fear of letting go, of trying something new, and then being told you're not good enough.
Yeah, I think I see less of that these days. It definitely used to be the case that that paid off for people if they could sort of pull an outstanding lesson, so-called outstanding lesson out of the bag. And by the same token, there's other teachers who day in, day out, I think do a fabulous job, but really crumble under pressure. And
yes, that's true.
When somebody comes and watches them, they just go to pieces and they become so concerned and anxious about it that they can't be themselves. And so anything that we can do to sort of prevent either of those outcomes is obviously a good thing. So the idea basically of reciprocity is to say, look, if I'm going to come and, pop into your classroom and scrutinize what you're doing, then you can do the same to me.
Yeah.
And that's a much more human way of conducting the relationship. And I think that because of the inherent hierarchical imbalances that we get in institutions like schools, I think it's incumbent on the person with the most seniority to extend trust first and say, look, you come and have a look at me, and we'll talk about what you saw, and then we'll discuss how that's going to fit with what you do, and then I'll come and watch you. And I think that's a much more human way of doing things, and also it's a way of doing things which is much more likely to people actually finding ways to improve.
Yeah. So why do you think then lesson observations have become so one-directional, with leaders observing far more than they teach?
Well, this is partly speculation on my part, so I don't want to necessarily speak for anyone else. But so there's the whole pressure where school leadership is essentially, in lots of ways, is very managerial. With leaders there's an expectation that they're monitoring, they're quality assuring, they're collecting evidence, they're compiling reports, and all of this sort of stuff. And so teaching as a sort of product of the school becomes something that leaders inspect rather than necessarily something that they're doing in their day-to-day practice. So it's fairly rare these days to encounter head teachers that teach. It's not. There are some, and I've always got huge respect for head teachers that teach, but it's doesn't happen as often as you might expect. And the more senior you are, the less and less you tend to teach. And so a lot of people see that as almost a reward for time served, that you get. You do your time, you get it promoted, and then you don't have to teach anymore. And obviously, I'm saying that as somebody who doesn't teach either. So I'm exactly to be as criticised as anyone else in this. It's only you that comes out well here, Michelle, with your
3 years in the classroom and refusing to move on from the classroom. I don't know. It just gives me this energy when I'm in the classroom amongst the students. And I love to deliver lessons and plan as well. But I guess
So lots of people often say to me, do you miss teaching? And I don't miss teaching because I do loads of teaching. I love teaching. I really enjoy the interactions with children, and and I always it's always a huge blast. But I don't miss the job of being a teacher with all of the the burdensome administration and the sort of the pressure, and I don't miss that at all. And I think that's the difficulty that a lot of teachers experience, that what they want to be doing, interacting with children and planning great lessons and all the rest of that stuff, which they really value, they often feel that they are being pulled and pressured to do things that they don't necessarily see the point of. And I think that's part of this managerial nature of the job, that as it's sort of evolved over the last 15, 20 years or so, it's become increasingly like that.
Yeah, that is true. Let me pause to welcome those who are online listening live and those who will be listening back. Thank you so much. You're welcome to share a message or make a comment or ask a question. I'm sure David will be all too willing to answer. So tonight we're talking about lesson observations. Do we watch to learn? Who really benefits from these? So my next question to you, David, in the article you argue that the observer often learns more than the observed. And, sometimes we don't really think about it like that, but when you actually drew that to my attention. So what are the implications of that for professional development?
Well, so if I'm right, that the people who teach least observe most, and the person that gets the most benefit from that interaction is the person who's observing, then you get all of this expertise going into the hands, the minds of those who need it least. So I watch tons of lessons and I don't teach. And so what's the point of that? Who's benefiting from that? Whereas maybe it would be sensible to have the people that do the most teaching doing more observing, so that they can get the benefit of being on the other end of it. But there's also
Go ahead, David.
Oh, I was going to say there is the consideration as well, though, that it's not just observing more that matters. It's the more you know, the more you understand about teaching and the way students learn and all the rest of it, the more you see. So there's a kind of mutually reinforcing thing where you learn a lot through observation, but unguided observation is probably less useful. I remember as a trainee, watching lessons with kind of no idea what was going on, and just feeling really bored and just thinking, God, I wish this was over. and so I think that being guided in an observation, sort of going in with someone else and having things pointed out and sort of thinking, why do you think that's happening, or what do you think's going on in that kid's head? That really helps people learn more from the process of observing lessons.
And based on your observations over the years of how people observe, do you think schools have a framework, or do you think schools are equipped to go into, with a framework during these observation cycles, knowing exactly what they're looking for? Because from my perspective, I think, because I have to do some observations as well, and I think sometimes there is no real guidance, and you just go in there with the knowledge that you have of what it should look like. And so there's probably no uniformity, and we're all looking for different things, or we think we know what we're looking for. So what have you observed? Has that changed or evolved?
Yeah, it's changed massively. So when, I was back in, I think it was like 2013, 14, something like that. And I was invited by Ofsted with a group of other sort of teacher bloggers to come and have a meeting about lesson observation. And, there was very much a feeling in the water at about that time that lesson grading was a bad thing. And all lesson observation in schools at that point were graded observations. And there was a huge amount of evidence which suggested that was pointless and inaccurate, invalid, unreliable, and broadly a waste of everyone's time and effort. And so I was one of a group of people articulating this sort of thing, and it was amazing to feel that Ofsted were listening to these voices like mine, and as a result, I mean, I'm not saying that it was down to me, but as a result of those interactions, Ofsted decided that they were going to get rid of the idea of graded lessons. And it was amazing to me how quickly, once Ofsted made the change, how quickly schools started abandoning the practice of grading lessons. And it's now pretty rare, I think, to find schools in England that have graded observations. It's very, I'm sure there are a few, but it's now pretty niche for that to be the case. And as I'm sure you've found, Michelle, that over the last few years, coaching has become increasingly de rigueur, very trendy. Everyone's doing an instructional coaching program. And so going into these observation interactions with really good intentions, with an understanding that what they're trying to do is improve teaching rather than judge teaching. And that's kind of all to the good. But I do think there are some points being missed and some sort of underlying assumptions to that, which maybe get in the way of those interactions being as effective as they could.
Yeah, even with coaching, yes, that's become a really popular approach to professional development and training teachers. But even within that, I realize there are some weaknesses and some areas for development, rather, because I think sometimes schools introduce these initiatives, but do not really use a proper change management system. So they're not embedded in practice. They fall by the wayside. And, you start out in September with all this vigor and we're going to be coaching and we're doing live coaching and instructional coaching. And then when the pressures hit, as you mentioned earlier, by the time we get to the end of the first term, nobody even mentions the name or the word coaching anymore. So, that is the issue. Things are not being given the time to be embedded in practice, or the people who are meant to be coaching are lacking the training themselves. So that is what I've observed.
I think that's one of several problems. There's lots of products out there that sell to schools as to try and make the coaching process easier. Some of them very, very popular, and I think that they can be used. I'm not saying they always are, but they sometimes are used to kind of window dress, to sort of give the appearance, something needs to be done. This is something, let's do this. And often it can be very superficial.
Yeah, that is a real concern. But but there are means and ways, and some places do it really well.
Oh, they do. So some places do it really well, but I would contend that the places that do it really well are doing other things really well first. And it's those other things which make their coaching programs successful.
Do you want to share some examples, David, of what they're doing well that then makes the coaching or the observations go well?
Well, I mean, so here's my kind of spicy take, and it's that the underlying assumption to lesson observation is that that teaching is the limiting factor in school improvement, and teaching is the output of teachers. So if we improve teachers, we improve teaching. And that seems like a really logical, plausible underpinning logic. And I think it's missing something quite important, because I think that teaching is the output of schools, not the output of teachers. So I think schools can cause teachers to be more or less effective. And I think there are a great number of schools, certainly, in both those camps, there are definitely schools that make teachers worse at teaching. And so when those schools put in coaching programs, they completely miss the things which are making it hard for teachers to improve. And they spend all their energy trying to get teachers to do things which they can't actually do anything about because of the conditions in the school.
Yeah. The conditions in the school that they're either oblivious to or ignoring and thinking it is the teaching on its own that is the problem. Thank you so much for joining all the way from Kingston, Jamaica. Thank you.
Hello.
Appreciate that. Oh, yeah, I know. So people in Jamaica are listening to you, David. So we're listening for your words of wisdom here.
Good grief. I'm sorry about that. You may be in the wrong place.
No, it's all good. So I agree with you, because if the cistern is broken and you keep pouring water into it, you're not going to be
Yeah, that's a
making
nice
any gains.
analogy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No.
So
So I've got this sort of idea in my mind that there are two sort of caricatured models of school leadership, and one of them, which I think I'd refer to as the deficit model, says
mhm,
that essentially the deficits, the problems in schools are caused by lacks. They're caused by there not being enough of something, and so there's not enough good teaching. So that means that teachers are the problem. So when things go wrong, the whole logic is to look for whose fault it is, blame that person, deal with them in some way. And so in order to find out whose fault it is, you need tighter and tighter and tighter accountability systems.
mhm.
And the result being that we trust less and less and less, and that can easily become toxic. And then on the other side of the fence, you've got a surplus model, which says we've got enough. There's enough in here to be able to do things well. So if we've got problems, then we shouldn't just assume that there's a lack. We should assume that there's a problem which is causing the sufficiency that we've got to go awry. So instead of thinking, teachers that aren't doing the right thing, let's find out what's wrong with them and fix them. Instead, it's thinking, okay, so let's find out why teachers are doing the things that they're doing. Like, what are the systemic pressures that are causing them to behave the way they're behaving? And let's try and change those pressures. Let's try and if to use your pouring water analogy, let's see if we can send the water down a different pipe, and rather than blame the pipe, blame the setup of get a plumber in. I don't know. I'm losing the analogy maybe slightly, but it's not the pipe's fault. It's the plumbing's fault, and the plumbing is the responsibility of the system.
Yeah, and that system is predominantly led by or school leaders or controlled.
Yeah. So
there are external forces as well.
There are external forces. So the thing, things like the economy and politics and all of those things cause external forces that the systems we generate have to contend with. But what I think, everybody has all schools are run on systems, and systems are interactions of policies and human beings, essentially. What's the infrastructure that we've got? We've got a building, we've got people in the building, and we've got make decisions about how we want to move people around that building and get them acting and behaving in certain ways at certain times. And that's your system. And so all of the systems that we put in place are intended to work well. But so it kind of makes sense for somebody in a position of authority to look at their carefully planned and designed system and say, okay, if we've got something that isn't working, it must be the fault of a bad actor in the system. It's somebody has bad faith, and we need to identify who it is. And I found it very useful and interesting to apply the idea of Parsi-wid, which is the purpose of a system is what it does. So if you've got an outcome, your system is causing that outcome. So if student results aren't very good, that is the system is generating that. If behavior is bad, that's a product of the system. Whatever you've got, if people are turning up late to lessons, your system is causing that to happen. Now, no one intends it to. Nobody wants a system that makes people late for lessons, but we inadvertently create them and then blame, then we punish kids and all the rest of it, instead of thinking, why are they doing that? What's making that happen? And how could we change things to stop it? And that, I think, is a much more intelligent way of trying to run a school.
And that takes a reflective leader, reflective leader.
Not just reflective. There's a kind of it takes a kind of trustworthiness and an honesty that can be quite. Can be quite hard, to turn it around, it's quite easy to hide behind the idea that it's other people's fault not doing what you've asked them to do, and instead of trying to own the fact that ultimately it's I'm the guy at the top, and I make the weather, and if things aren't working out the way that I want the way they want them to work, then the only person that can ultimately do anything about that is the person at the top.
Yeah.
That's
The
tough.
problem
That's
is,
really hard.
yeah, it is hard, David, because that's the issue, and not many leaders have the humility to do that and say, right, I need to just kind of review my approach, check the system, see where the problems are, and then address those so that we can address the outcomes. And as you said, it's easier to just go and blame.
Yeah.
The,
Well,
yeah, further down,
and
and it's
also,
the teacher's fault.
it's much easier, and it speaks to your question that you said earlier about what stops, what sort of creates this unidirectional observation process. It's that it's much more comfortable to be the person watching a lesson. It's much more comfortable to be in your office and in a meeting and like doing senior leader stuff. It's much more comfortable to do that than to be pounding the corridors, to be in lessons all the time, to be present and visible. That's much more grueling, and that's much more exposing. And so there are incentives, perverse incentives, which encourage people to not do the difficult thing. And ultimately it takes somebody, the person at the top of the school, to be leading that, to be modeling that process, to be here, there, and everywhere. And it's such an exhausting job. And I think, I don't want it to sound like I'm blaming head teachers, school principals for not being good at their job, because I'm not doing that job. I'm not doing that job because it's bloody difficult, and it's incredibly stressful, and it's very isolating. And the people that do decide and elect to do that job, they need the support of the wider system in a way that I don't think we're good enough. I don't think we give head teachers enough support to be able to do the job that they need to do.
Oh, that's an interesting point there, David. Is it that we don't give them enough support, or is it that they sometimes do not express that vulnerability where they perhaps
what we're in danger of doing, Michelle, is doing what I'm sort of saying that is sometimes takes place in this deficit model of school leadership, that sort of saying whose fault it is. And I think that leads to a deficit model of education where we haven't got good enough head teachers, or we've got school leaders that aren't humble enough or brave enough or whatever it is. And instead, I think we should be thinking, if we've got school leaders behaving in ways that we don't think they should be behaving, that's a product of the system we've created. And instead of saying they're not good enough, we should be saying what's causing that, and what systemic changes might we be able to make? How might we be able to remove the obstacles that exist to try and make it easier?
Yeah, totally agree. So it's almost like a domino effect. So if one system is broken, it affects the other, and then it affects the other.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
And you only have to talk about to school leaders, to head teachers, about how they feel about external inspections and how stressful they find that, and how they feel about their position vis-a-vis the inspector. And you've got the whole system then again in microcosm there.
Yeah, that's the thing as well. I was going to ask you a little bit about learning walks, because the question I had really was, how long do you think somebody should spend observing a lesson to really get a feel of the teacher's capabilities or the outcomes? And then from that, what do you think about learning walks?
Okay, so I think if you're going in trying to judge a teacher's capabilities, then it doesn't matter how long you're spending, you're kind of doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So I find you can learn a lot from spending 2-3 minutes in a classroom, but not necessarily a lot about the teacher. But you can learn a lot about schools from popping into a lot of lessons and seeing what's going on in fairly short snippets. And so I think when I work with a school, I'll often have a conversation with the leadership team and say, what are we going to see in lessons? What are the things that you've been working on? What's the vibe around here? And they'll give a list of things that they feel confident and secure are happening. And if we then visit lessons and find out that those things aren't happening, then that tells us something really, really important. And it doesn't tell us, I think, necessarily much about the individual teachers, but it tells us a lot about, okay, you spent all this time working on this thing and you've got staff who aren't doing it. Why is that happening?
Yeah. And that's going back to the system again.
Yeah.
Check to see what's happening.
So learning walks are great for taking the temperature of certain aspects of a school, but they're useless, I think, largely for determining the effectiveness of a teacher.
Yeah, thank you. And that leads me to the other question, which I'll ask and get you to think about while I go for a very short break. And that's about the limits of feedback. So many schools assume that feedback automatically leads to improvement. So the question is, why does this assumption break down? So have a think, David, and we're just going to go for a short break.
Okay.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. Yes, we're back, and for all the people online, quite a number. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you've been making notes and you'll have some takeaways this evening. Also, if you wish to make a comment, please do so. If you wish to ask a question or just to make an observation, please go ahead and do so. So tonight I have with me David Didau, and we're talking about lesson observations, and that's leading to other discussions as well about the system and what's broken and where it's broken and how we can work together as a community, as a school, and not just in isolation. You know, the head teacher's doing one thing, the teachers are doing one thing, and there's no real connection, or passing the blame, or it's the head teacher's fault, or it's the teacher's fault. And it's how we can all come together to make sure that these systems work and that observations are effective and that they lead to excellent outcomes. So David, my question to you just before we went in that short break was, many schools assume that feedback automatically leads to improvement. You know, we go and we observe and we give feedback and we write little cards and we say, well, this is what you need to do and this is what you've done well. But why does this assumption break down?
Okay, well, I mean, we know quite a lot about feedback more widely and more generally, which is applicable to this. And so what we know is that feedback is very, very powerful, and that power can either be powerfully positive or powerfully negative. Yeah. And the power of feedback to make things worse is not something that's very widely discussed. But there's all sorts of studies that show that actually feedback doesn't lead to improvement and can often be associated with declining performance. And so you have to, so it's obviously not enough to say give more feedback and things will get better. And so it's worth thinking about, you know, what's your theory of feedback? So one of the I think most useful feedback intervention theories that I've come across is the one that was developed by Kluger and Denisi back in 1996, quite old now, and they basically said that what you have to consider is who you're giving the feedback to and where they are. So if you've got a student who is not meeting expectations, the only feedback that's going to be useful for them is feedback that convinces them to work harder. And so that's really tough because they've been trying possibly for years, and they've been finding out that trying harder doesn't actually lead to an improvement. And so saying to them, try harder or do this or do that just feels like nagging. And you know, if they could get better, they would have tried to do that. So it's convincing them that there is an area in which they could expend effort profitably, and it will lead to improvement. So that's a real trick. But the other kinds of feedback that you might give, feedback that doesn't convince people to try harder in a specific area, either causes them to aim lower or give up completely and just think, oh, I can't be bothered. And that's a really negative thing.
Yeah.
And you can probably think of students who've responded like that to being told, oh, you're not quite there yet, and they just sort of shoulders slump, and they just think, what's the point?
Or the feedback, David, that you give, whether to students or staff, and then you go back and you look at the same piece of work, or you observe the same lesson, and you see the same things being done. What is the problem there? Because you've given the feedback, but there's absolutely no improvement.
Yeah. Well, so yeah. So it could be there's one of two things happening there, and I think we've have a greater tendency to do this with teachers than with students, is to decide, well, they just can't be bothered, they're just bad people, or they're incompetent, and we tend not to. Well, I think we try not to treat children like that, but we're less tolerant of adults struggling to make improvement. So the other side of the feedback coin is people who are doing well, who are meeting expected standards. And so feedback there is only worthwhile, it's only worth giving if it makes them aim higher. So anything that doesn't result in them aiming higher was a waste of your time. Yeah. But too often they get feedback which makes them think like, oh, I'll just carry on, doing the same. Maybe actually I could work a little bit less hard and get the same results. And so it's relatively rare for people that are meeting standards to get meaningful feedback that causes them to think, like, what could I do next? And that's an important side of it as well.
So I'm currently conducting a research for my dissertation, yes, and one of the questions was in the leadership survey, it was about what is it that prevents them from being effective in certain areas of the school, and this is one of the areas, and a lot of them responded and said time. So they've made these observations, they've given feedback, but just don't have the time within the given curriculum to ensure that these things are acted upon or to revisit them.
Okay, well, that's equivalent to making students do work and then not marking it. It's just not acceptable. So if you haven't got time to mark the kids' work, if you're genuinely, right, I've not got time for this, don't make them do the work. Don't make them, don't put them through that. It's probably not reasonable. So if you're going to observe teachers and you haven't got time to give them meaningful feedback, why are you observing them? What's the point? Stop it. Observe fewer teachers and give the ones that you've observed more meaningful feedback, or find something more valuable to do. But don't waste everyone's time with that. If you haven't got enough time, don't do it. And I think what happens is we never say, as leaders, school leaders, we never say, I've been to watch your lesson, but I'm not going to give you any feedback because I haven't got time. What we say, we kind of fudge it and go, I'll try and get round to you. And then we make ourselves, inadvertently, untrustworthy because we don't commit. We don't do what we said we'll do. It's always better, I think, in a position of leadership to undercommit, to underpromise and then overdeliver rather than the other way around. Like, you can apologize for it a couple of times, but after that, you erode trust.
Exactly. You lose the trust and the teachers have no faith in you anymore because you're not dependable, so to speak.
Exactly. I mean, that's toxic in a school. If leaders are enacting a routine where the effect is to make themselves less dependable, then that's undermining them and the rest of their colleagues, and it's leading to it can't be leading to anything good. So the other side of it, of the feedback thing, Michelle, is that even when you do give people feedback, it's still very hard to act on often, and we know this from giving feedback to children that we have to explain it really carefully and patiently to them. And we know that just doing that's not enough, that very often we have to reteach, we have to model, we have to scaffold, we have to sort of go through carefully designed instructional processes to get the results that we want. And why would we think adults are magically different?
They need the same guidance. And we can't assume that everybody's in the same place. Once you're a teacher, we're all have the same level of experience, and so therefore just get on with it, and this is what you're meant to do. It's important that we meet people at their starting point and ensure that we give them the right guidance that will help them develop and grow, and not assume that because you are now called a teacher, it means that you're equipped with everything you need to be outstanding. And I think it's for those of us as leaders, whether middle or senior leaders, it's our responsibility to ensure that we guide our staff. And as you said before, it's best that we do not take on too many things. And if we can't give feedback, just don't observe. Leave it for another time. David, I was observed once, and I'm still waiting. That was a few years ago, and I'm still waiting on my feedback.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I was told, oh, so sorry, lots of things are happening. Inspections are coming up. This is happening. And I'm still waiting for my feedback. And it was somebody else who saw the software where they document the feedback and said to me a year later, when I was like, oh, wait a minute, another cycle has come around and I haven't had my feedback from the last one. And that person said, oh, by the way, yeah, I saw it on the platform, and your lesson was regarded as outstanding. I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't even know that. So yeah, it is so important that we are intentional when we plan these observations.
So you still get graded lesson observations in your school, Michelle?
So here it is slightly different, and I think different schools use different models. But yeah, they had week. These were the things that we're using now. Weak, outstanding, requires improvement. Yeah, still being graded here.
Okay. Well, there's an overwhelming body of research which says that is largely nonsense. That the validity and reliability of those judgments is less accurate than doing a coin toss. So it'd be fairer for the observer to come in, flip a coin, and decide whether the lesson was good or not.
Goodness me. Yeah.
I know.
Well, yeah, I totally agree, because it's so subjective as well, isn't it? And it's
down to all sorts of cognitive biases that we know that human beings suffer with, like the halo effect. So if people sort of believe that you're like generally a great person, then they're predisposed to think everything you do is your lessons are good. And the reverse is true too. There's things like the fundamental attribution error, where we attribute things to character when they should be attributed to context. There's all sorts of things which mean that our judgment of things like lessons is just nonsense. We shouldn't do it. Yeah. We shouldn't. I'd say that's I don't want to speak ill of whoever's running that system, but they could do with paying attention to a very, it wasn't an accident that the English Inspectorate decided to jettison that completely.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I need to look more into that and see how that is working in places like the UK at the moment, because you are right.
Oh, I've got loads on that I could send you, Michelle.
Yes, please. Okay. Because this idea of grading teachers, it demoralizes staff rather than motivating them, in my opinion.
Well, even the ones who come out well and who are told they're great, they don't then listen to any feedback. They just go, no, great, like, leave me alone.
Just like kids, you give them their exam papers back and they go straight for the grades. They don't care about all your comments and feedback. Yeah,
exactly.
So this practice, as I said, is not necessarily throughout all the schools. The schools have different approaches, and different attitudes towards observations. Some schools it's just once for the year, and then some learning walks and drop-ins. So it varies, and the impact varies as well. So I'm going to ask you something as an aside, David. What do you? Because you talked about leaders modeling what it should look like.
Yeah.
What should that look like? Because I've known of situations where the leader actually goes in and takes over the lesson.
Yeah.
During the observation.
Okay. How does that work? Tell me what happens.
So, for example, you've gone to observe a lesson, and decided that you did not like the teacher's approach, and so you take over the lesson and tell the teacher to go and sit and watch. But that's not modeling, in my opinion. That's being undermining.
Yeah, that's pretty rubbish, isn't it? I mean, that must be awful for anyone that's happened to.
Yeah.
I mean, I've definitely, been in and observed teachers teaching things that I know to be wrong. And that's quite difficult. It's like, do I do I sit on my hands, or do I say, oh, maybe that's not right? I don't know. That's a quandary. But the way I would advocate for modelling is, what I do with the schools that I work with is I say to them as part of the process, once I've got a sense of what's going on in a school, is like, this is what I'd like. This is what I think. You've told me that these are the things you want to work on, and this is how I think you might go about that. Let me teach some lessons. So in your school with your students, and you can film me if you want to, and then we can talk about whether that's useful, whether the children are responding in ways that you want them to, and whether that's applicable for your context. And what I've tended to find by doing that is that I think there's two real benefits. That one, it puts me in a position of vulnerability. So I'm putting my money where my mouth is and saying, right, here I am in the classroom with your students, and so it gives me credibility, and it makes people much more likely to listen to and trust what I'm saying. Assuming the lesson goes well. And we can talk about that in a moment, because it very often there are interesting reactions when I teach lessons. But the other thing it does is it overcomes a significant hurdle that I've often encountered in schools, where I make suggestions and somebody in the school says, our students can't do that. And I think that when I've just demonstrated that they can, they've done it with me, so clearly they can do it, then it completely circumvents that. And that's very useful.
Yeah. So then modeling, as you said in the article, is more effective than just telling.
Yeah. Which is why we use it in lessons with kids.
But my question is, though, how do you pitch this to schools, to say to leaders, get into the classroom and model what it is you'd like the teachers to do, rather than just telling them? Because I think, once you kind of make that shift into that position of authority, you kind of remove yourself from the classroom a bit. Yeah. So how do you pitch this?
No, and I think, it's, for me, it's it's a real signal about the effectiveness of leadership in a school, where you've got leaders who are like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's, and I get them to do it with me, and and we practice it together, and then they become confident about it, and or sometimes people are just like, yeah, no, great, I can just do that without any help. Let me go. That's brilliant. I'll do it. But those are environments that give me faith that there's an investment in trying to genuinely improve everyone and create the conditions for everyone in the community to thrive. But where you encounter people going, oh, I don't think I've got time for that, or I've got more important priorities, which of course there's always other stuff to do, then I think that's a bit of a signal that people are not prepared to do the thing which is harder.
Yeah. Human nature,
Well, is it human nature? I don't know. But for me, it's rather than blaming them, rather than saying, oh, that's a bad person, that's a bad leader, because I don't think that's true at all necessarily. It's trying to think, well, why are they in that position? Why do they have that reluctance? Often it's fear. Often people are genuinely terrified of looking like a fool. And I think that, there are, as we said before, there are definitely school leaders who, because they haven't taught very much for quite a long time, are just not really sure what they're doing. And they spend all of their time reading books and articles, and they know a lot about, cognitive science or stuff like that, but they're not necessarily practiced at applying it in classrooms with actual children. And that then makes them feel very much on the back foot, and I think it's really important. That's why I think it's really important for head teachers, for principals, to find some time in their school week to teach at least 1 or 2 lessons a week. I think it's imperative if you're going to lead teaching in a school. But I know it's hard, and I know there are systemic pressures which make it feel that that's an impossible choice, and I think that we have to reflect on genuinely what's, if we think teaching and student outcomes are the most important thing and we're choosing to spend our time on other stuff, what's going on?
Yeah, someone online said they've had the same experience regarding no feedback from an observation. It wasn't graded or anything, just absolutely no feedback.
Yeah,
So
I think that's really interesting. It'd be interesting to conduct polls on that. Maybe that's something like Teacher Tap could do and find out. I don't know if they've done that before. I think it would be quite a good piece of research to find out how widespread that is. My kind of hypothesis is that's pretty widespread. That's pretty common. And I've definitely worked in and with schools where they have really good systems to make sure that doesn't happen. But unless you have those systems and unless they are carefully maintained, it's very, very easy for that to slip.
Yeah. So you spoke earlier, David, about it's important for head teachers to maybe try and have at least one lesson so that they can kind of stay in the loop and that they too could model as well in the fear and all of that. But I just want to add, and this might be a little bit controversial, that I find also that sometimes the leaders are lacking experience as well. We find that increasingly you've got people in senior leadership who sometimes have been in the classroom for 5 years. And so they are propelled into these positions and they do not always have the tools and are always equipped to then guide and provide substantial feedback to members of staff.
Well, that may be the case. I mean, that may be the case with some, but I don't think having taught for a short amount of time invalidates you in terms of having expertise. But I do think it's important to keep that as an ongoing thing. And I think, far too often we do promote people out of the classroom and particularly here in England, with the growth of multi-academy trusts, there are so many jobs existing in education which aren't classroom facing that it just becomes very easy for people to make them to become quite remote from the core business.
And quite early, really early in their career. I don't know, David, I'm coming from a system where you really had to prove your worth in the classroom before you were even considered for a leadership position. I was trained in Jamaica, and I remember, for instance, I wasn't even allowed to teach Key Stage 4 until I taught Key Stage 3 for at least 3 years and proved that my subject knowledge was secure enough and that I was ready to take on Key Stage 4. Not to mention Key Stage 5, we really had to graph. And in saying that, I was asked to be head of English really young. So it's not about the age or anything. I just still find that sometimes our leaders become far removed from the classroom way too early in their careers. And then, they sometimes lack the acumen to lead whole school sometimes. And this is my observation over the 30 odd years. So it's not specific to any particular setting at the moment.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously your experience sort of definitely trumps most people's, Michelle. And I think that often people with a huge depth and breadth of experience like you often present real challenges for some school leaders, and they can find it very difficult, and they can become quite defensive because they think, oh, what if that person knows more than me? What if I look stupid in front of them? And I think that to the extent that that's true, that again, there are systemic causes for that. And instead of leaders feeling like they've got to be the expert at everything, that they've got to be, that expertise flows downwards from the leadership team, and then we all imbibe, it from them. It's a much better sign of a healthy school when leaders work to have sufficient expertise to be able to recognize greater expertise in others, and to be able to say, so clearly, Michelle, I don't know how to teach English in your classroom as well as you do, because you've been doing it for 33 years, and I'm sure you've been doing it brilliantly for all of that time, and therefore, until proven otherwise, my best bet is to defer to your judgment and sort of ask you questions and say, instead of saying things like, do this or try doing that, instead I should be watching you and saying, can you explain that? And, you know, I noticed you doing this thing and I don't quite understand how it works. Can you explain it to me? And then you'll tell me, oh yeah, I'm doing this, and then I'll think, brilliant, okay, I'll add that to my own repertoire. That's a great idea. And then the observation process becomes much more two-way. It becomes much more, we're learning from each other, rather than it being a scrutiny process, a monitoring process where it's my job to tell you whether or not you're outstanding, which is bunkum. Why would you trust my judgment on that? Why would you trust anyone's when you have more expertise than they do? Do you know what I mean? So
I understand. I'm smiling away because it's my experience daily. And sometimes I have to try and remove that unconscious bias and think this person is reacting this way. Maybe it's because of my years of experience. And because I think people know that I'm constantly researching and I'm constantly coming with the facts.
Yeah.
And I will challenge, in a respectful way when I think you are saying something that I find dubious. I will ask, where did that come from? Or do you have the research to back that? Or, where did that come from? So sometimes I do hold back a bit because I do not want people to think that I'm trying to undermine their authority. So I do, I do. But, it works well when those leaders that you've described will say, right, Michelle, I'd like you to help us with this.
Yeah.
I'd like you to be a part of the coaching team, or we know that you're really keen about curriculum development, and I'd like you to form part of that working party to develop the school's curriculum. And that works because my aspirations are different and not necessarily, in leadership.
I think I think a lot of schools make a lot of problems for themselves by treating staff equally. And that sounds quite a contentious thing to say, but I think that, when you look at like the policies that we put in place, they're often put in place because of the weakest member of staff. And we think, oh, okay, so if we don't have this policy, then that person or these people will do this thing. And so we need this policy to stop them doing the bad thing. And then we create a system where people who are doing something that's better than the policy are prevented from doing things which are better. And I think what instead we should do is we should have a principle of earned autonomy, where we extend people the privilege for making decisions increasingly depending on our perceptions on their effort and expertise. So if you create a matrix, an effort expertise matrix, and you say, so people with high expertise and high effort, those are your absolute engine rooms of the school. We absolutely don't want to constrain them. We don't want to limit them. We don't want to ever be saying to them, like, you have to do this thing. We don't care what your experience is. Don't do that thing anymore. Do this thing. That should never happen. And we should instead, as you say, we should be going to them and saying, help us design the policy, help us lead the school. And then you've got other people who are really, really high effort and low expertise. So they like keen as mustard, but they're young. They haven't got it yet. And so they need a lot of direction, and they need to be told that, do this, master this, now have a go at this, now try this. And they need that direction in order to get to a position where they don't need it anymore. And then you've got another set of people who, and I'm not sure this is necessarily an accurate way of putting it. I'm not sure my matrix quite gets it, but I'd sort of characterize them as being high expertise, low effort. And these are people who are often perceived as being, a nuisance in schools, that they're sort of grumbling in the corner of the staff room and they're saying things like, oh, we've tried that before and it didn't work last time. And these are people who are often seen as a problem, and we just need to bypass them. We need to try and, find ways of shutting them up and shutting them out, instead of harnessing their massive experience and expertise and getting them on our side and making them part of the process. And I think that they're often my favorite group of staff to work with in a school. And channel the energy. And then you've got some low effort, low expertise people who need to make absolutely urgent improvements. And these are the people that keep, head teachers up at night worrying, because, but it's often it's just a small handful of these. It's an open secret who they are. The kids know who they are, parents know who they are. Everyone knows in the community who this handful of people are. And then we design the policy because of them. And that's unfair to everybody else. And I remember years ago being part of an inset day at a school that I worked in. And what had happened in the inset day is that we were told as staff to bring copies of our students' exercise books. And we were told which kids to bring. And we brought them all into the school hall. And then basically we spent a chunk of the day looking through each other's exercise books. And I remember sitting on a table with these two women, and one of them, she was looking through a colleague's book, and she turned around to a colleague and said, "You're the reason SLT treat us like shit."
Oh.
Yeah.
Because her books weren't up to par.
Her books were disgraceful. And this poor teacher was looking at them going, I work my fingers to the bone. I do the impossible day in, day out. Why are there these crazy demands on what I'm supposed to do? And she looks at her colleagues' books and goes, that's why.
Yeah.
I have to do this because of you. And, and she just felt very angry. And it was a very uncomfortable thing to witness. But I think it really kind of exposed the idea that what you need is an intelligent policy which says, okay, that member of staff needs really, really tight constraints, and they need to make fast, immeasurable improvements straight away with very clear consequences for non-compliance. But nobody else should be treated like that unless they've earned it. And those people who are in that position should be told, here's how you earn more autonomy. Here's how you prove that you're making sufficient effort and expertise and, too often, we create this one size fits all that doesn't work for anyone.
Yeah, I've seen that. And I love that observation there, David. Low effort. What was that? Low effort, low expertise. And the policy is created for those persons, maybe after some form of observation, whether it's book look or learning walks or formal lesson observations. And then from that, these policies are created that everybody has to adhere to, which becomes frustrating. Yeah.
It's deficit model culture. Yeah. We've got a deficit, therefore the policy needs to reflect the deficit rather than thinking we've got a surplus. How do we utilize the surplus?
I've experienced that before, and we're coming to the end of the show, which has been so amazing. I would talk to you forever, but I remember working in a particular school once. This was back in the UK, actually, and based on some observations, and I think the results came out, the summer exam results came out, and they weren't very good, and they weren't very good, but not across the board. There were pockets of greatness. However, the decision was made that all CPDs will be held in the hall, all department time as well will be held in the hall. And so we had our little tables, and we all had to sit together, every single department in this cramped space, doing CPDs. And it was not very productive because it was noisy. We couldn't speak to each other. We couldn't hear each other.
So you had to have your meetings in the same space so that the leadership team could observe you.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And so I would ask, okay, is it okay for my department to just stay in our classroom? Because we do get the work done. You could come and check in, but we do get the work done. And we were told, no, everybody has to be together so that, and it became counterproductive because we sat there trying to listen and trying to
you're being punished for other people's shortcomings. And there's nothing more likely to cause resentment than that.
It caused a lot of resentment and a lot of arguments as well and antagonism and confrontations. It surely did. So when we carry out these observations, I think it is so important that we treat the teachers as individuals and not not create these CPDs, so to speak, for everybody based on that one particular teacher, because we're not helping everybody, as you said.
No,
because some people are a little bit ahead, or some people need that coaching at a certain level, and not everybody needs the same approach.
We trade off fairness for equality, and we should be doing the other way around.
Yeah,
we need to treat everybody fairly.
I totally agree. So, David, you've been around the block, so to speak, in education. Can you share an example of where modeling significantly changed a teacher's practice?
Well, can I give you an example where I think it's changed a school's practice instead of
Yes,
a
please.
teacher's practice?
Yeah.
So there's a school that I won't name them, but there's a school that
No.
I've been working with for a couple of years, and they're part of a small trust that I do ongoing work with. And the first time I went in to visit the school, they'd become part of this trust, and so it was my first visit there, and I was taken around and I was shown lessons, and you know, and in response, and beforehand, I'd done the thing of saying, you know, like, what are we going to see? What have you been working on? And I was shown all these lessons, and the feedback that I had to give to the school leaders who'd shown me around was that things weren't working. That the things that they said we'd see, we didn't see. The things that they said they'd been working on, there was very little evidence of them. And that was, you know, and that was a really tough start. And I said to them, look, when I come back, can I spend the day teaching lessons, and I'll focus them on all of the things that you want to prioritize. So I'll do, you know, I'll spend a day, I'll do the full day working with your students in your class, so that I can really demonstrate the things that I think, you know, the things I think you want to do. Yeah. And then obviously if I've got it wrong, then you can say, you know, that you can give me feedback on that. So it becomes reciprocal. And so we did that. I came in and there was quite a bit of tension when I came back, because they felt like, you know, I judged them, and they felt like, you know, I found them wanting, and, you know, and they were, not that I felt that they wanted me to fail, but they were like, oh yeah, see if you can do it with our kids, because our kids are tough. And to be fair, you know, some of their kids were tough. And one of the things they watched me contend with was, you know, what do you do when kids do things like refuse to answer questions, and how do you deal with people like not participating in lessons? And so, you know, they saw me do all of those things and address the obstacles that I knew they were facing day in, day out. And I brought in my set of mini whiteboards and demonstrated to them like how mini whiteboards solve a lot of problems. You know, if you use those effectively, you get rid of a lot of problems. But you do, you know, but you need groundwork to make them work, and all, you know, you need routines, all of this stuff. And so I did that, and then we debriefed afterwards, and, you know, they were saying things like, you know, there was one incident, I remember this, where we'd had a bit of a standoff with a student where, you know, I'd asked them to participate, and they'd not wanted me to ask them a question. And I worked really, really carefully to try and sort of make sure that everybody in the class was asked multiple questions, and that when people were struggling or clearly signaling that they weren't wanting to participate, I'd say, you know, okay, well, what I want you to do, you know, they'd say, don't know. And I'd say, okay, well, I want you to listen really carefully. I'm going to go to someone else, and I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to ask you what they said, you know, and all of that sort of really trying to break it down to make it as easy as possible for them to participate. And then, you know, this one particular student in one particular lesson where it felt very tense and I felt very uncomfortable. And we had a discussion after that where, you know, they were saying to me, like, you know, was that the right thing to do? And I was saying, do you know, I really know why you're asking that. I didn't enjoy that situation. You know, nobody gets out of bed for that. But what's the alternative? The alternative is that we say to some children, we're going to accept that you don't participate in lessons, and we're going to accept that you're going to learn less, and we're going to accept that you don't have a sense of belonging, that you're not included in the life of the school in a way that other children are expected to. And that just because it's difficult, just because it's hard, you know, definitely we don't want people to feel stressed and anxious and all of those things. And we're going to work hard to create a culture where we minimize that stress and discomfort. But nevertheless, it's really important. You know, so one of the things I would say is every lesson, I make a promise that I'm going to ask every single child who's going to be asked a question, probably multiple questions. They don't want me to keep that promise, But it's important for me to keep the promise. And I think that's something I discussed with teachers, that if we commit to making that promise every single lesson, that we can build great things on that kind of foundation. Anyway, we talked about this, and, and they talked about the fact that, what some parents say, get in touch and say, please don't ask our kid a question. And I was talking to them about how, as school leaders, it's really important that you explain to parents why you can't meet that request. That of course you thank them for the information that their son or daughter is anxious, and you say to them, we're absolutely going to minimize that anxiety, but we can't write off their education. That's got to come. Anyway, we did all of this, and it was, and then the next time I came back, and I could see how hard they've been working on some of the things, and then 2 years in, I'm not saying this is down to me at all, but it feels like a really transformed school, and particularly the English department that I've done a lot of work with. I'm just blown away by how hard they've worked, and how far they've come, and how much more the students do in lessons. And it's one of those, it's really wonderful to see that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you ought to take some credit there, David, because you modeled it, and you pushed through the challenging moments as well. And you showed
but they've done the work. I mean, that's the thing that they've grafted over the last 2 years to make it a reality. And I that's the thing that turns schools around. It's the hard work of individuals in schools turning up day in, day out. That's what and I feel privileged to be able to go in and sort of say, here's a bit of direction. Here's what it could look like. And without those people doing the work, it doesn't get done.
Oh, yes, of course. Because even in my research, it suggests that the leaders set the tone and the atmosphere and the culture of the school, but ultimately it's the teachers who then deliver.
And the leaders do the work as well. Day in, day out, everybody's work grafted. And so people like me who swan in and out like a couple of times a year, we don't do that much. We're only effective if people think what we're saying and what we're showing is worthwhile, and then they're prepared to work on it. And so, in answer to your question about like how that kind of modeling process makes a difference, I think that had I just gone in and criticized them and said, here's what you need to work on, I don't think we'd have got anywhere. But the fact that they had this day and they'd made all these films of me teaching their kids, and when they were used them to show members of staff when they said like our kids can't do that, and they'd show this some ginger bloke doing it with them, that made it that just changed the conversation they were able to have, and
the trust. And I think we should do that. I think more people should do that. And I know everybody's working hard, David,
of course
I totally agree. But I think more leaders should do that. And I'm not just talking about senior leaders, middle leaders as well.
It pays off, Michelle.
It does pay off.
It pays off.
Yeah.
And so like one of the things, like, so I've been doing this, so people sometimes say, oh, it must feel like a huge risk. And I do it at conferences and that sort of thing. Like I did it at a Research Ed conference on Saturday in Guernsey, where the school where we were holding the event got some kids in. And obviously that's very fake. It's not the same thing, and people say to me, oh, that's so brave. And it isn't, because even when it doesn't work, you learn something brilliant from it, and you have great conversations, even when things go wrong. And you've just got to let go of that and say, it's not about lessons working. It's about showing you're working. It's about being honest about what your intentions are, and whether, why you did what you did, and letting go of the results.
Yeah. David, you mentioned in the article that one of the most powerful tools in terms of observation is teachers going to observe each other. And I know we talk about peer observations, but we don't really get the time for that. And then you answered that question actually in the article when you said, this is where the leaders should provide cover or relieve the teachers so that they could actually go out and observe each other, learn from each other, and develop their pedagogy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you see that often, or is that something we still need to work on?
I think there are definitely people doing it. There are definitely school leaders who do that. I can think of some who do a great job on that. And I know of head teachers who really lead from the front, who who model
Yeah.
teaching and do a fantastic job. I think they're a minority. I don't think it's
Yeah.
common practice, and but I'm loath to blame anyone for that.
Oh,
I really
absolutely.
think we collectively need to take responsibility for
Oh,
the
yeah.
systemic pressures which make it hard for people to do that. But anyone who fancies having a chat and sort of seeing how getting some help in how you can kind of shift that culture a little bit, I'm really happy to talk to people about it.
That would be great.
Get in touch.
That's something I'd love to take back to my school as well, because I think it would be so effective. So for a bit of final reflection, David, if you could change just one thing about lesson observations tomorrow, what would it be and why?
If I had my magic wand.
Yes.
Yeah. So the thing I would change, I would stop people sort of looking at lesson observations as an opportunity to make a judgment on teachers, whether that's grading them or otherwise. And I think that if you view lessons as an opportunity to look at causes and look at an opportunity to ask questions. I mean, one of the things that we didn't discuss is the research which suggests that leaders should conceal their preferences and not tell people what they want to happen. That always reduces what's possible. And so, because it assumes that you know better than the people that might know better than you. And so using observations as an opportunity to ask questions rather than make judgments, to look at rather than look for.
Oh, I love that. So look at rather than look for. Could you explain just a little bit? We've got another couple of minutes. The bit you said about head teachers should go in not having preconceptions or.
Well, yeah. I mean, to try and sit on your thumbs and sort of thing, not prejudge, not have a fixed view of teachers. It's really hard to do because obviously that's an essentially human bias. But if you're going into a lesson and you're thinking, I'm looking at the teacher and I'm making a judgment of the teacher, then that feeds into that process. But if you're going in to a lesson and going, okay, I'm going to compile a list of questions about what's going on, and then I'm going to ask and have a discussion about what those, what I've seen. So I noticed this. Can you talk to me about, explain why that happened? I think, obviously if someone says, oh, I've got no idea, or I didn't notice any of those things, then you have a different conversation. And if someone says, yeah, let me explain that to you, you'll love this, then you listen to them and you go, great, perfect. Thanks for explaining that to me. I'll try and apply that elsewhere, and withholding judgment as far as is humanly possible.
Thank you so much. I think that would mitigate a lot of the antagonism that sometimes people face when they're giving feedback, and when the person who's getting the feedback disagrees and go, nope, don't believe that. Nope, explain that.
Yeah. I mean, because that's somebody trying to download their expertise onto the person that that's such a no, let's not even go there.
Let's not go there. But thank you so much, David. And those of you who've been listening live and those of you listening back, thank you so much for tuning in.
Thanks David, for having me.
Oh my, it's been a pleasure. That's been so informative, honest, and it's just an open discussion. You've challenged my own biases as well. And I'm sitting here. Oh, yes, you have. And very subtly, I took on the reprimands very subtly here, thinking, right, Michelle, you need to change your thinking about certain things. So I do hope that our school leaders, and that's whether you're middle or senior leader, will listen, take notes to improve pedagogy and develop teaching practice, because this is what it's all about. It's not a critique of leadership. It's what can we do to be better.
Yeah, and remember, your school causes the conditions which make teachers more or less effective.
Exactly. I was going to say amen to that at the end. Just sound like
amen.
A proper end to a sermon.
Hallelujah.
Oh dear. So remember, and this is a quote from David's article, we need to diagnose, plan, model, debrief, rehearse, revisit. That's a summing up from the article. Observation is not about hierarchy or a show of power or authority. It's about developing staff to deliver consistently good lessons. So thank you so much. And over the next few weeks, think carefully before you establish the next observation cycle. Ask yourselves, why am I doing this? Who will it benefit? And then what will be my intended outcomes? So thank you all for joining. David, thank you so much for your time. And do keep in touch. You've got a wealth of knowledge I need to continue to tap into. And do continue to write and share with the rest of us, because your writing is making a difference. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely evening wherever you are.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.